We have just 10 years left to dramatically downshift carbon. For those living in Taranaki, putting gas on a sustainable footprint has to be front of mind. Kia ora, I'm Jamie Silk, and we're looking at how low energy housing and urban form can one, accelerate the retirement of our gas power plant generation, and two, preserve precious carbon headroom and high density energy gas fuels for precious and high value needs in the future. The essential need that we're looking at is warm, healthy homes. From an electricity perspective, we've got a system that looks great today with good industry returns. From Taranaki perspective, great jobs here, and obviously with security supply. Whilst we know it's not sustainable, it's not front of mind for most people. They feel they've got good power choices, and homes get by, albeit a number with a fuel subsidy. We recognise it causes harm, and that's beyond the carbon impact. 25% of Kiwis live in energy poverty. Many suffer from sickness due to a cold, unhealthy homes. So it must be changed, and the Zero Carbon Act helps us along that pathway. The government's looked at high electricity costs, and obviously we need to plan for the current declining reserves. But of course, change in the electricity sector is tough. We've got a highly optimised regulatory and markets regime, perfect for what we need in the 20th century, but still locks in and favours electricity asset growth over the type of demand-side investment needed for downshift. Looking back 100 years, the world looked pretty different. Decentralised energy, local generation, power not essentially just used for light and not for heat. The poor obviously not get electricity, and a lot more cold, damp, unhealthy homes. What the past does tell us is that the world can look very different over time. Behaviours, expectations, and our material environment change. And that's really interesting when we look at our future electricity planning and our roadmaps. In essence, they substantially assume we carry on doing what we do today, the way we do it today, but electrify away from fossil fuels. So you can see in the transparent electricity accelerated electrification scenario, a huge 68% growth in electricity as we shift to electric vehicles one-on-one effectively from combustion engines and electrify industrial process heat. What that means, you see in the right chart, is that we keep burning gas well out into the 2040s. And additionally, we invest hugely, obviously, in wind, solar and batteries. And in fact, we end up with 3 times more of these new renewables than we do of the current hydro. That's interesting because these renewables have a much lower energy return on investment generally than hydro and than the gas, conventional gas that they're replacing, which implies obviously a significant hit to national productivity. This one-to-one switch of what we use, such as in ICE cars to electric vehicles, also has a big hidden carbon budget that we're not adequately accounting for in terms of the embedded carbon in the products that we import. So what if we actually tried to look at decarbonising electricity without this new growth, having a material downshift first? What are the alternatives? That's a mindset that's brought front to mind, obviously, as we look at our forward operating environment. And for those of us in Taranaki, gas is the starting place for that conversation. What does it take to actually put gas on a sustainable pathway so that we can defer our use until it's got extremely high value in applications such as high temperature industrial process heat out into the future, potentially marine transportation, or in my case, cooking a curry at peak times. What that looks like in terms of our future electricity generation without gas and without a huge renewables build out is that we have a real cap on both our energy demand and our capacity. Peak demand needs to decline by about 30% because of the loss of peakers for gas purposes, whilst electricity supply overall demand declines about 15%. In terms of residential consumption, because we want to reserve this for industrial type uses, we'd be aiming for around a 40% decline. So envisaging 2020 New Zealand homes, what would that look like? Well, as we said, peak demand drops dramatically. So the peak available electricity per person drops to around 0.5 kilowatts per person. It seems tiny and is small and a big reduction. Today, for instance, network planning would generally assume after diversity maximum demand for a household of around 3 to 4 kilowatts. We'd be building all our homes to the existing New Zealand passive home standard, which itself is highly achievable. The German standard is about half what ours are, and we already see conversions achieving 50 kilowatt hours per meter squared in terms of electricity consumption. Our homes would be healthy, the air would be clean, and a critical aspect is return to affordable homes, as we had, I guess, earlier in the 20th century, with an average home price of 3 times average income. There are a lot of options we've got in moving into this affordable, low energy possibility space. Clearly, the way we build new houses, the residential refits, shifting our electric heat and water heating away from electricity, but also a whole range of disruptive changes to financial, rental and ownership models, as well as social engagement, digital models, etc., and community thinking. Where we do apply these principles and planning techniques in co-housing and community tikanga modelling these days, we actually already see indicated lifetime savings of around 30%. So it's all quite possible, but how do we filter through the vast range of possibilities we've got? And that's where we apply the strategic analysis. The strategic analysis uses all those skills and tools that we generally use for screening opportunities, whether it's the commercial readiness, the technical readiness of technologies, our financial analysis, but critically adds this bio-technical constraint, really understanding how out 100 years' time, we're really using our carbon and other resources in a sustainable way. You can see in this analysis for 40% electricity decline by 2030. On the left hand, we're looking at various point technology solutions, such as battery storage or wood pellet heating or ground source heat pumps, etc., as well as behaviour changes that can bring forward this change. But also we look at these things in conjunction with the infrastructure environment. So the built environment you see across the top with different ways of getting high insulation warm homes, as well as the infrastructure of the energy system and financial system design itself you see across the top as we consider different investment options that put housing and energy and downshift investments on the same level playing field perhaps as some of the infrastructure investments we have today, or as we redesign the grid and the markets to be much more interactive with demand participation in the transactive grid. Looking at a second goal in this portfolio, 40% of current homes being retrofitted to affordable passive home standards. You see the same techniques, but on the left, the options that we're looking at again include behaviour changes in terms of social and shared assets acceptance, but different economic models as well, perhaps again social state housing oriented or private sector oriented, but introducing intergenerational financing and different ways to underpin risk as you make much more upfront investments. And then across the top, mixed changes, and again to see where the sweet spot, the intersection between technology, behaviour and infrastructure is. And we look at our traditional single family home concepts, and then we also look at perhaps more integrated and mixed concepts such as co-housing and papakainga housing concepts, or high density housing with mixed apartment and homes, or more integrated urban planning, home design and activity design. And you can see that as you intersect these different infrastructure and point type solutions, the possibility, the opportunity grows. So a lot of noise, obviously, in all those options and possibilities that we have that we filter through. But essentially, 5 things stand out. In this planning and delivery for the future, we're always considering the technology and supply chain are consistent with our long-term biophysical constraints. We're also acknowledging that we've got actually really adaptive consumers over time, and as we layer in the sharing economy, digitalization, everything, data enablement, everything, we can get behavior changes and new practices. We acknowledge that the collective community investments that perhaps we've seen in some parts of the system in the past, such as trust developing networks and water infrastructure, local developments in the past, that kind of collective community investment should actually roll out to other areas such as housing and how we supply energy into those houses, etc. And that can drive much more upfront investment for long-term efficiencies. We've got a real focus on how our infrastructure and material environment, our urban and building design and retrofits actually drives efficiency in carbon and resource use over time. And of course, we have to deliver financial, market, and social innovation to fund what are much more long-term oriented investments. So how do we actually kick off this change? Well, we need to look for the triggers that make getting early projects underway credible, just as startups obviously look for the first watering hole as they cross the deserts that they need to cross. In our case, we can see early opportunities around highly viable wood pellet heat that in New Zealand obviously can use a lot of our waste wood, as well as displace low value exports to a much more high value domestic need. We can envisage substantial residential rebuilding as we constantly need to refurbish and reclad our houses, but also as we address the housing crisis that we've got out there. In an environment today where we've got extremely low yields, high risk, and people really looking for asset-backed long-term secure annuity returns that in some way index to future economic growth, such as rentals, and obviously ESG type investments, we've got the opportunity to really redefine how we finance housing and material investment across multiple generations. And of course, we've got councils and the government looking at building back better, looking at connecting the four capitals, and understanding that there's benefits in sector coupling between health, energy, aurora, well-being, and the material environment. They're going to help us adapt to community, council, consenting, and contracting type processes. So those can be triggers to enable us to get some early shift projects underway. So if I had to pick 3 projects out of all those options, the 3 that come to mind is, how do we actually make a rapid switch to wood pellet fires? How do we deliver a new industry affordably rebuilding healthy, low energy, low maintenance homes that last 100+ years? And of course, how to deliver the property ownership and financial innovation that funds these long life assets? Ngā mihi.